So one of the ways that I've been really challenged to do that is to physically get on my knees in the morning. And sometimes I got to set a 5-minute timer because I'm stir crazy, or I kind of cheat the system and cheat in the corners. But the last time that I found myself bursting out in praise was yesterday morning, on my knees, saying, Lord, you're so good. Thank you for everything that you've done in my life and are doing, and what I know you're doing around me and in our church and in the young adult ministry. And, I could go on for forever, right? But I was moved to praise on my knees yesterday morning.
And you will go on forever one day.
Yeah. And then that praise really never will stop. So the last thing I want to talk about is, after all this that Paul lists in verse 18 through 20, after reminding Timothy of the gospel, after reminding him of Paul being the foremost of sinners, after reminding him in his praise of God who God is, he says, this charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by then you may wage the good warfare. Bob, would you mind closing that door, please?
I'll do it.
Hold in faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Well, if you're anything like me, and you read those few verses, you might go, what in the heck is going on in some of this stuff, right? What do you mean handing people over to Satan? What do you mean, what do you mean the good warfare? What do you mean? Well, let's talk about it. So first thing I want to highlight is that there seems to be this comparison. There's a comparison between Timothy and between Hymenaeus and Alexander. On one side, we see Timothy, who's charged to respond to the prophecies about him. Interesting. I'll let y'all do that research on your own time. He's charged to act on the call on his life to minister the gospel. He's charged to wage the good warfare. He's charged to hold faith and have a good conscience. Now, on the other side of things is Hymenaeus and Alexander. Paul rebukes them for rejecting the gospel, for shipwrecking their faith, for blaspheming the gospel, and therefore being handed over to Satan to learn. Now, what you probably don't see, and what I'm kind of inferring from this statement he makes about Hymenaeus and Alexander, is that grieved Paul. Seems like Paul knew them. Knows their names. He talks about their faith being shipwrecked, which makes me think at one point, maybe they were journeying. Maybe they were trying to figure it out. Maybe they were showing up to church every once in a while. But then something happened. And a lot of us in this room, we know some Timothys. We know some Hymenaeus and Alexanders. And those that we know that maybe we look at their faith and we think about it being shipwrecked, it grieves our heart. It breaks our heart on their behalf. It seems to break Paul's. And so I want to look at these two different sides as we end our time together today. And I want to start by saying, I'm going to say three things in this section. The first one is, there's a choice that you need to make. That you need to make. Timothy, Hymenaeus, and Alexander all had access to the same gospel and the same faith. Yet Timothy, Hymenaeus, and Alexander made different choices. Timothy held tightly to this gospel, but Hymenaeus and Alexander rejected it. And I think that oftentimes in our life, maybe I could just speak for myself for a second, I've become so concerned with the people I know that I feel like are rejecting their faith and are shipwrecking their faith, that I completely ignore the call on my life to be like Timothy. I'm so concerned with the negative, and I'm so obsessed with the negative, and I'm so obsessed with even my own brother who doesn't know the Lord, that I forget the call on my life to be true to the gospel, to wage the good warfare, to hold faith and have good conscience. It's really interesting because Paul gets to a point where you can see in verse 20, look at the very end of verse 20. He says, I have handed them over to Satan that they may learn not to blaspheme. And a lot of us can read that and get stuck on it. Because it seems really harsh. It seems really harsh. Why is Paul saying this? Here's my best educated guess. I think that sometimes in our life, we care so much that the people we know don't get shipwrecked, that we become a crutch to them. I think that sometimes we stand in the way like the helicopter mom who won't let her son climb on the sofa because she doesn't want him to fall and get hurt. But sometimes it's the fall itself that teaches the child not to climb up on the sofa. And sometimes people in our life that we so deeply care about and that we're praying for and that we're advocating for and that we're loving, we need to just get out of the way. Because they might need to experience the sin that they're living in without us being there to tidy it up every time. And maybe that's convicting to you. I know it's convicting to me. But just because you're saying, hey, you need to learn this, doesn't mean that you stop praying. Doesn't mean that you stop loving. Doesn't mean that you stop being there. But you need to seriously consider if you are part of the reason why they're not experiencing the full weight of their sin. Because you keep standing in the way. I know it's really hard to hear. Because some of you right now, your mind is going to your children or to your relatives or to people in your life, and keep advocating, keep praying. But pray that they would feel the weight, the full weight of their sin. Because it's through that they will know Christ. It's through that they will understand, hopefully, their depravity and come to the Lord and say, I get it now. I get what Paul was saying. I get that I'm a blasphemer. I get that I'm an opponent. Because I think when Paul said this about Hymenaeus and Alexander, I think he was saying with a little tinge of hope. I think he was saying, what does he say? He says, so that they may learn not to blaspheme. That means he has hope that one day they won't do it. He doesn't want them to do it. He wants them to come back to the faith. So be on your knees in prayer. Pray diligently for those people. And pray that you would stay true to the gospel, like Timothy's doing. The second thing, and we'll do these two things pretty quickly because we're almost at the end of our time, is there's good warfare to make. There's good warfare to make. My eschatology teacher right now, I'm in seminary and finishing in December, and I'm in eschatology, which is the study of the end times, essentially. And my teacher said, he said, look, if you want to be a orthodox, non-heretic of a Christian, you need to believe two things about eschatology. That Jesus is literally coming back, and that he's coming back in the future. He said, other than that, I know lots of scholars who believe different things and have good biblical support. I think the good warfare being talked about here is that we need to make warfare on the big things and not let the small things divide us. That's what Paul's saying here. These people making endless genealogies and myths and all this stuff, it doesn't, no. Don't get lost in that. Remember the true gospel. That is the good warfare to make in a world that doesn't understand it. And lastly, there's a tension to walk in daily, men. Our world is fallen. The church contains fallen people, and the world contains fallen people. But the greatest difference between the church and the world is that we have a rock and a redeemer. And as Tony Evans says, when you've reached rock bottom, don't forget that there's a rock there. And that rock is Jesus Christ. And that's what Paul's reminding Timothy. So men, may we humble ourselves. May we remember in reflection and in closing that we've been called to a trustworthy service. Just like Paul was reminding Timothy, you, each one of you, make this personal. You have been called to service of Jesus Christ. What an honor. There's a trustworthy saying that Jesus Christ came and he died for sinners, of whom I'm the foremost. There's a trustworthy one that we praise and we love and we adore and we get on our knees to worship. And there's a trustworthy response. And that response is the gospel. And that response is to remember who he is and where our seat is at the table. So I'm going to invite Dave up. Dave's going to challenge us with our business card thing, with our cards.
Okay, guys.
And then he's going to